So here we are in the files that I've extracted. You can see the DB schema, a couple other files. What I'm really looking for is the VCSA XX installers. There's the CLI installers located here. I'm actually going to use the UI installer just for, it's more visual, right? It's more interesting to look at. So we have the 3 different operating systems that are supported. We got Linux 64-bit, we've got Mac and Windows. There's the Windows right there below, locales. We're going to use our Mac installer app. I'm going to go ahead and double click, open that. I'm going to go ahead and go full screen. So you can take a look at some of our options here. I'm going to step a little so you can see these. So we have install, upgrade, migrate, and restore. Incredibly important to me that you know that through the installer, we can do the upgrade and the migrate. Migrate from an existing vCenter Server Windows to a vCenter Server Appliance. Now that migration tool, huge deal for some of you out there. This is its location. It'll walk you through the process. Below that is restore. If I back up my vCenter Server Appliance files, I can restore it by using this application right here. So really big time applications on the installer that I wanted you to be aware of. But we're not there, right? This is not why we're here. We're here for the actual installation. So I'm going to go ahead and click install here. And then as you can see, it's a basic wizard. And it's a wizard that we've seen in our careers our whole lives. It's going to show you what we're going to do. It's going to unpack and deploy the appliance for us into a virtual machine. We're going to accept the license agreement, but only if you read every single word. You got to read every single one. So pull up a pillow and a nice blanket and get started. Next, we're going to go with our embedded platform services controller versus our external platform services controller. Remember, I talked about that distributed installation among a few virtual machines instead of a single virtual machine. We're going to go with embedded here, but if you were going with the external platform services controller, what I'd like you to do is go in order, and the order is platform services controller installations first, and then your vCenter server last. So we're going to go with the embedded in this case. We're going to click next. So it's asking, where are we installing this? Let's take a look. I believe 202 is open. We'll just try that. And then I'm putting, the password I'm putting in right now is the host password. So the host password right there, and it, correct. Well, it's giving us a certificate warning. Do we trust this particular host? Yes, we do. I know that host well. Configured it several times. And now your VM name. What are you naming your vCenter Server Appliance as a virtual machine? We're going to call this our lab VCSA, vCenter Server Appliance. Now, in your environments, this is going to represent a vCenter Server domain. So you would name it something important, your administrative domain or something like that, and then identify it as a vCenter Server Appliance. Now, the root password we're putting in right now, below this, is not to enter the vSphere web client. This root password is to access the vCenter Server Appliance itself for configuration, which we'll show you in a little bit. But it's important to remember that. It has to be a complicated password, so that is one number, one symbol, one uppercase, and at least 8 characters. And then we're going to confirm it. I call this the fancy passwords. Put in 2 fancy passwords. As long as they match, it'll go through. Now, here's the deployment size we talked about. You're going to actually choose the size of your environment. Now, scalability comes into play here. If you are on the border of a tiny environment, go ahead and bump yourself up to a small environment. It is much easier to pre-plan than it is to fix. And what is it? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, something, some statement like that. That is especially true in our IT environments. So plan ahead a little bit. I know I am all about efficiency within a virtualized environment, but in this case, if you're going to scale, if you're close to scaling anyways, go ahead and make that leap. This is my lab environment. This is just a demonstration, so I'm going to keep it at tiny, and the storage size, I'm going to keep it default. Again, err on the side of caution here if you can. Now we're going to select our data store, which data store we're going to use, and if possible, do we want to enable thin disk mode? Now, thin disk mode means we're going to go within our boundaries back and forth. We're going to expand as needed up to the boundary we set for this particular virtual machine. But the part we're not using right now, we're going to let other people use. We'll talk more about that when we get into actual thin disks, but it's like a flexible allocation of storage. And whatever I'm not using, I'm going to give to somebody else. So now we need to pick our network, our VM network. So what subnet or port group you're using, our assignment, static or DHCP, our family of IP addresses. That's really important. If you're using IPv6 here, you should use IPv6 almost everywhere, except maybe in your virtual machines. So the system name, we'll call this VCSA 6.5, 65. We're going to use the IP address of 10.0.0.224, I believe. Subnet mask length 0/24 network. Our default gateway 10.0.0.1. DNS servers 0.0.1. Okay, now obviously that's going to be different for your environment. Whatever your network settings are for your VCSA is what you're going to put in here. We're going to go ahead and click next. Oh, system name, invalid fully qualified domain. Missed that part. I was supposed to put in the fully qualified domain name. I just went with the IP address there to simplify. So here's our deployment details. It's going to give us all our information for this VCSA. And then once we are done, we're going to go ahead and click finish, and we will have completed the installation of our vCenter server. All right, so we finished our initial stage 1 deployment. Now we need to actually configure this vCenter server to be our management service. So we're going to go ahead and click continue here. And you're going to see that we're now on stage 2. This is where we're setting up our actual configuration. So I'm going to go ahead and click next, where we're setting up our vCenter server appliance. Now, time synchronization is incredibly important for those of you who know Kerberos and the 5-minute problem there. If you have a 5-minute skew, authentication will automatically fail. So it's important to have a centralized time server that keeps track of things for us and syncs up for other servers. Now, we can synchronize with different NTP servers. They could be internal. You could have a stratum level of 1 if you're hooked up correctly. But usually we are pointing to an external source, to a server in our environment, and then that server is the one that disperses the time. So then I would put the IP address of the NTP server here, and that's what we would use to access it. We could use SSH to connect there. But in this case, for my lab environment, I'm just going to synchronize up with the ESXi host. Not recommended in production, but definitely okay for your lab. So I'm going to synchronize there. We'll go ahead and click next. And then we have our SSO domain. It can be anything you want. The default is vSphere local. It does not have to match your actual domain. So if it's onlineitcamp.com or whatever it is, it doesn't have to match that exactly. In this case, we're just going to leave it at the default vSphere.local, but this is the domain for the single sign-on server. The username is administrator, and then the password. This username and password, unlike the ones we were using previously, is how we're going to access the vSphere web client. So I'm going to go ahead and put in a password. Again, this is one of our fancy passwords. We want to use 8 letters. We're going to use a capital letter. We're going to use a number and even a symbol to make sure that it's complex enough that people can't brute force our passwords. Next up, we are going to confirm that password, and then we're going to go ahead and put the site name. This is important if you're using linked mode to link multiple vCenter servers together for your sanity, right? So you don't get lost in your own environment. I've seen several data centers that are extremely large, and those data centers have multiple vCenter servers inside of them. So you want to make sure that it's easily identifiable. In this case, we are a lab. I'm going to next. It's saving our parameters, and then it's going to ask us if we want to join the customer experience program for VMware. If you join this, what's going to happen is it's just going to send information to VMware directly so that they can take a look at what's going on in their environment. Because this is my lab and because I was already in the beta program and they're tired of hearing my name, I'm going to go ahead and not enter the customer experience program. They're like, oh no, Russ is submitting something else. No, it's fine. So in the end, we're going to finish up with our configuration. You can see that it's 224 is where this is going to be reachable. This is our vCenter server. And if we're accessing this particular vCenter server, that's the IP address we're going to put inside of the browser. We look through these details, make sure it's okay, SSO is correct, everything's correct in our environment, and then we click finish. You will not be able to pause or stop the install. What it is, click OK to continue. Boom, now the install is taking place. Now, I'm not going to make you sit here and watch this progress bar, so I want to thank you for looking at this installation. A lot of people don't take the time to go through this installation, so I'm glad you stuck with me. I'm glad we were able to do it together and give you some idea of how it's put together.